In 1904, Nikola Tesla wrote that his Wardenclyffe transmission project was not an invention, but a reconstruction, that the principles he was working from had been understood and applied before. He used the past tense deliberately, and in photographs of American and European cities from the 1850s and 1860s, there are structures in the backgrounds of ordinary street scenes, tapering towers with specific profiles that appear at regular intervals, match no documented architectural category, and are absent from the same city's photographs by the 1890s and 1900s. Between those two photographic states, Tesla tried to rebuild what had been taken down and was defunded before he could finish. Nikola Tesla said something in 1904 that I keep returning to. Not one of his famous statements about electricity or the future, or the inadequacy of his contemporaries. Something more specific. In a technical description of the Wardenclyffe project, he wrote that he was not inventing a new system of transmission, but recovering the principles of one that had existed before. He used the past tense. He said that the system he was building was based on principles that had been understood and applied before the period of modern scientific development. He framed his work not as creation, but as reconstruction. This statement does not appear in most accounts of Tesla's life. The standard biographical narrative positions him as a visionary who saw further than his contemporaries, who understood principles of electromagnetic physics that the scientific establishment of his era hadn't yet recognized. And that narrative is substantially accurate, but it omits the specific character of his self-description in 1904. He was not a prophet seeing forward. He was an archaeologist working backward, reconstructing something that had existed, something whose remains, whose physical evidence, were part of the landscape he was working in, and that he was attempting to understand well enough to rebuild. What remains? What physical evidence of a prior transmission network was available to Tesla in the period when he was designing and building Wardenclyffe? I want to answer that question carefully, because it is where the investigation gets specific in ways that the standard Tesla biography doesn't address. The answer starts with what I'll call the tower photographs. In the photographic record of North American and European cities from the period roughly 1850 to 1875, there is a category of structure that appears in the background of images, standing at heights above the surrounding buildings with a distinctive profile. A tapering tower, often with a bulbous or spherical element at the top, sometimes with lateral projections that the standard architectural history of the period does not account for. These structures appear in street photographs, in panoramic city views, in the background of images whose primary subject is something else. They are present in the photographs. They are not in the official architectural inventory of the cities where the photographs were taken. This is the specific claim I want to examine carefully, because it is the kind of claim that is easily dismissed as misidentification. The standard response is that these structures are church steeples, industrial chimneys, or telegraph poles, photographed from unusual angles or at insufficient resolution to be clearly identified. And in some cases, that explanation is sufficient. Some of the background structures in these early photographs are exactly what the dismissal suggests. But not all of them. Some of the structures have profiles that are not consistent with any documented category of contemporary architecture. Profiles that are consistent with what an engineer of Tesla's capability would recognize as resonant transmission structures. Towers designed not to support observation, or to mark a building's religious function, or to vent industrial combustion, but to broadcast, to transmit something into and from the electromagnetic environment of the surrounding area. The geographic distribution of these structures in the photographs, where they can be reliably identified, is not random. They appear at intervals that are, with a consistency that I find significant, approximately equal, not exactly equal. Terrain and urban density create variation, but at intervals suggesting a design spacing, a planned distribution across the urban landscape, a network rather than a collection of independent structures. The kind of spacing you would design if you were placing transmission nodes at the distances required for coverage overlap in a specific electromagnetic frequency range. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower was designed for a specific frequency. The frequency was determined by the resonant properties of the Earth itself, the electromagnetic coupling between the ionosphere and the ground, that Tesla called the terrestrial circuit. The tower was sized, the electrical specifications were chosen, the geographic siting was selected with reference to the resonant properties of the Earth at that location. These were not arbitrary technical choices. They were derived from Tesla's understanding of how the terrestrial electromagnetic system worked, an understanding that he described in his 1904 statement as based on prior knowledge rather than original discovery. If the prior knowledge was encoded in physical structures, in towers built to specific dimensions at specific locations to exploit specific properties of the terrestrial electromagnetic circuit, then the structures themselves are a record of that knowledge, a physical library written in tower dimensions and geographic spacing rather than in text. A library that was still partially legible in the 1890s when Tesla was designing Wardenclyffe, available to anyone who knew how to read it. And that was, for reasons I want to address directly, being systematically demolished in exactly the period when Tesla was attempting to use it as the basis for reconstruction. The demolition record of pre-reset towers in North American cities in the period 1870 to 1910 is not well documented. Most of these structures don't appear in official architectural inventories, and therefore don't appear in demolition records either. They were taken down quietly, without the kind of institutional record-keeping that attends the demolition of listed buildings. But the photographic record shows the before state, the 1850s and 1860s city photographs with their unidentified background towers, and the after state, the 1890s and 1900s photographs of the same cities without them. Between those two states, in the same decades that Tesla was building and promoting his transmission system, something removed the pre-existing network. Why would you demolish a network of transmission towers in the decades when a scientist was attempting to reconstruct a transmission system based on the same principles? The answer that I keep arriving at, the answer that the evidence keeps pointing toward, is that the prior network's existence was evidence of the civilization that had built it, and the civilization that had replaced it needed that evidence to disappear. Not because the towers were dangerous, not because they interfered with anything, because their presence in the urban landscape was a physical record of a technology that the official narrative of the industrial era claimed was being invented for the first time. A technology that Tesla was recovering rather than inventing, and a technology whose prior existence, documented in the towers themselves, contradicted the official history of when wireless transmission became possible, and who first understood its principles. Tesla's patent disputes, his conflicts with Marconi, the systematic underfunding of Wardenclyffe by J.P. Morgan after Morgan realized that the system could not be metered, that the transmission network would deliver energy to anyone within range, regardless of whether they paid for it. All of these are standard elements of the Tesla biography. What the standard biography omits is the possibility that Morgan's concern about metering was not just a commercial calculation, but a recognition of what a freely broadcasting transmission network would imply about the prior network whose remains Tesla was reconstructing. A prior network that had, presumably, operated on exactly the unmetered, freely available basis that Morgan found commercially unacceptable. A prior network that had provided energy to the people within its range, without a price mechanism, without metering, without the commercial infrastructure of scarcity and payment that the post-reset energy system required. The towers of the pre-reset network were broadcasting something. What exactly, I cannot say with certainty. Tesla's framework suggests electromagnetic energy in a frequency that couples with the Earth's natural resonance circuit, delivering usable electrical power to receivers tuned to the relevant frequency. Whether the pre-reset towers were transmitting in this framework or in a different physical register that Tesla was approximating but not exactly replicating, is a question I cannot answer from the evidence available. What I can say is that the network they constituted, visible in the photographic record of the 1850s and 1860s, absent from the photographic record of the 1890s and 1900s, was present and then was removed. And the man who understood what it had been and was trying to rebuild it was defunded in 1906 and watched his reconstruction demolished in 1917. Wardenclyffe fell in the same decade that the last of the pre-existing towers were coming down. The network, old and new together, was gone by 1920. What replaced it was the grid, the centrally generated, metered, priced, commercially distributed electrical system that required you to pay for every unit of power you used. The system that made energy a commodity. The system whose installation was the practical completion of the economic reset that had begun a century earlier with the demolition of the free fountains and the installation of the central banks. The system that, by the time it was fully installed, had made the very concept of free energy seem like a fantasy, like the kind of thing only a conspiracy theorist would believe, like something that had never existed and could never exist. But the towers were there, in the photographs, at specific intervals, for specific reasons, before they were taken down, before Tesla tried to put them back, before the grid was installed in their place. The photographs are still there. The spacing can still be measured. The towers are gone, but the question of what they were for has not gone with them. It persists in the early city photographs, in the geographic distribution of their sites, in Tesla's 1904 statement about reconstruction. The network existed. Someone understood it. Someone tore it down. And the man who almost put it back was stopped in time to ensure it stayed down. If a prior transmission network was visible in the photographic record and was being systematically demolished at the same time Tesla was trying to reconstruct it, and if J.P. Morgan stopped the project specifically because free energy couldn't be metered, what would the world look like today if Wardenclyffe had been allowed to finish? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this with someone who still wonders why Tesla was stopped.